àṣebà fọ́lọ́run àṣebà ènìyàn àtúnjú bàbá gbà kẹjà yẹyẹ wa o.
àṣebà fọ́lọ́run àṣebà ènìyàn àtúnjú bàbá gbà kẹjà yẹyẹ wa.
àṣebà fọ́lọ́run àṣebà ènìyàn àtúnjú bàbá gbà kẹjà yẹyẹ wa.
àṣebà fọ́lọ́run àṣebà ènìyàn àtúnjú bàbá gbà kẹjà yẹyẹ wa.
ìbálò ni mo ṣe tán rẹ o mo fẹ́ máa júbà kí bá mi ṣe ìbà ọba mi Èdùmàrè tó dá gbogbo ayé o ọba tó bá já ayé tó ń jẹ́ kó máa jú wá ṣe ọba mi Èdùmàrè ni mò ń wárí fún mo júbà mo ṣèbàṣèbà agbọ́ndókòló níwọ̀n sí júbà oyin àdèdèdókòló níwọ̀n sí júbà fèèrà egígùn mi ti wá ṣe tán ìjó mójú bàdà gbòòrò yáyá èmi Fọláṣadé Àbẹ̀ní ọmọ rere tí fìdí dùn pé díẹ̀ sá. àṣebà fọ́lọ́run àṣebà ènìyàn àtúnjú bàbá gbà kẹjà yẹyẹ wa o.
àṣebà fọ́lọ́run àṣebà ènìyàn àtúnjú bàbá gbà kẹjà yẹyẹ wa.
ẹ̀wọ̀n lè pàtó nílùú lẹ́yìn ni àyàndákùn díẹ̀díẹ̀. Fọláṣadé Àbẹ̀ní mo tún ti dé o mo tún ti dé kílíbọ̀ orin tí ṣe ti ń gbọ́ mi gbọ́ mi èmi Ọjà Àbẹ̀ní ti gúnlẹ̀ sí ẹ̀wù àròfọ̀ mo gbórin dé orin lásán kọ́ orin tó fọgbọ́n yọ ni èmi Ọjà Àbẹ̀ní ti doyì tí kọ́mọ́ ní bá a di rìnrìn mo wá fẹ́ lọ sínú ilé bàbá mi tí òbí ni mi ò máa rẹ́gbọ̀dọ̀ díjọ́ egígun o ogun kodo ogun ti kọ́ ọ lọ ogun jàrẹ̀ sí títí tí ogun òkó ṣe bẹ̀ lọ Ìjẹ̀ṣà òṣèré ni mi ò nílẹ̀ òbí ẹ̀rù ọlọ́wà ni mi ò mẹ́lẹ́ni ẹlẹ́wẹ̀lẹ̀ Ìjẹ̀ṣà mo lù mo panàdà àwa lọmọdún lógun ìjọmú pèrègùn lógun àwọn Ìjẹ̀ṣà ọmọ àtàwẹ̀rẹ̀ òṣèmúná jùlọ mojò múná kí lọ́ọ́ wá jẹ́ ọ̀wá mo fọ́ kínkínkínkín mo fi jọba lórí ojópo mo fẹ́rìn gèdè mo fi jọba lóhùn ní Ìjẹ̀ṣà mo sínú kí n ké sẹ́rìnwó erinwó mọ̀ mí jẹ́ olóbì ló mọ̀ mí jẹ́ Ìjẹ̀ṣà òṣèré onílẹ̀ òbí gbogbo Ìjẹ̀ṣà yé sábòde o
araran nàbòde araran
yé sábòde o
araran nàbòde araran
ọ̀tún èkérìyàn
araran nàbòde araran
òsè èkérìyàn
araran nàbòde araran
iwájú èkérìyàn
araran nàbòde araran
ẹ̀yìn èkérìyàn
araran nàbòde araran
yé sábòde o
araran nàbòde araran.
mo lémi ò wá ní fojú olóore gúngi nítorí òbí ni ó tó owó ni lágbà nífẹ̀ẹ́ òye ìlà ọ̀ràngún ni wọ́n ti wò mí dàgbà nílé aláràn òjijì ọmọ abẹ́gun lẹ́gbẹ̀rẹ̀ ọ̀rọ̀ fọ́ kẹmúkẹmú ọmọ òkè sàn ọ̀rọ̀ gbà mí ò ní sàn ló lọ dúndún ládéjọ́ bí bàbá tiwa lónìí gbọ́ wéré jèèjè àwa lọmọ ìsín ń ṣẹbọ bíi kóòdò mọ́mọ́ ń gbẹ ìkòrò ń ṣẹbọ bíi kóòdò mọ́mọ́ fà àtìsín àtìkòrò ńlá fi jọ ńlá nílé aláàrán mo kọlù mo kọjọ́ tán ìjọ ń yọ mí lẹ́nu mo so wètèrè gbé kejì nílé bàbá wa o àwa ò ní fi rédèrèdè gbẹ̀yìn ọ̀rọ̀ o.
nílé bàbá wa o àwa ò ní fi rédèrèdè gbẹ̀yìn ọ̀rọ̀.
olówó ẹ̀sàyọ̀ ni mo tún ti gbórin ọ̀hún dóde ni mo ti ṣetán mo fẹ́ gbọ́kọ́ lọ́wọ́ rokoroko mo sì fẹ́ gbàgèrè lọ́wọ́ ṣèdòṣèdò torí bíbí ni wọ́n bẹ́yìn mẹ́tàn bíbí ni wọ́n bí sọ̀sọ̀ mọ́dìdí bíbí la bí sùn mọ́ kòókòrò wọ́n bí mi méde ẹnu mi ni kì í sú mi kì í rẹ̀ mí bí iṣẹ́ bá di iṣẹ́ orin kíkọ bó bá jẹ́ ti ká pèdè àtàtà ká fi dẹ́rìn pò sónú ọba ni mí níbi ká kọrin gidi àgbà ọ̀jẹ̀ lolúfàdé òrò ìlú ti kọrin dídùn létè mo ti ṣe báyìí mo dánu dúró ná mo mọ̀mọ́ fẹ́rẹ̀ lé mọ̀mọ́ mi ìyá mi àlìmọ́ sàdíyà tó bí múlíkánú ìyá mi àlìmọ́ òjèrè ọmọ lájẹ òkó sọ́hún máa kú ọ bí ẹni kú bẹ́ẹ̀ ṣe ń tara mo mọ̀ ń rìn lọ́jẹ̀. jẹ́jẹ́ jẹ́ ni wọ́n tẹ́lẹ̀ lọ́jẹ̀ lé nílé àrèsèlú àwọn ọmọ ọ̀nà méjì nílé àrèsèlú àwọn ọmọ ọ̀nà mẹ́rìndínlógún nílé ekú jẹ́ ńlá mara gbósòkun ọjọ́ mo ló ṣe alákùnrin ọmọ pàgìdàpàgìdà sọ́gi mi dọ̀tọ̀ tó yìí. ọmọ alájẹ òkóso gbígbẹ́ ni wọ́n gbé àwọn kì í rù ṣebí ọmọ ọlọ́mọ ní báwọn rúgi. ọmọ adágilẹ́kùn èso ọmọ àpòyíkági àdúgbò rìnrìn lọ́jọ́ tí àrè ọ̀jẹ́ tó kọ́ náà bọ̀ lọ́jọ́ ọjọ́sí. apá ń sáré òyìnbó ń sáré gbogbo igi oko ni wọ́n sáré ikú yẹ́túyẹ́lẹ̀ wọ́n láwọn òmẹ́ni àrè ọ̀jẹ́ fìdí ọ̀nà náà lé lórí. nílé ekú jẹ́ ńlá màrá àgòsò òkun ọjọ́ mo ló ṣe alákùnrin ọmọ pàgìdàpàgìdà sọ́gi mi dọ́tọ̀ tó èèyàn. mo bá òbí mi sọ pé mo bá òbí mi sọ pé o wọn ò bímọ wọn ò bímọ tí ò wúlò mo bá òbí mi sọ pé.
òbí mi sọ pé mo bá òbí mi sọ pé o wọn ò bímọ tí ò wúlò mo bá òbí mi sọ pé.
mo bá òbí mi sọ pé èmi bá òbí mi sọ pé o wọn ò bímọ tí ò wúlò mo bá òbí mi sọ pé.
mo bá òbí mi sọ pé mo bá òbí mi sọ pé o wọn ò bímọ tí ò wúlò mo bá òbí mi sọ pé.
èèwọ̀ lọ́mọ gbọ́ àṣà bí òdì mọ́ mọ́mọ́ ọmọdé inú èèwọ̀ lọ́mọ bá pupa. mẹ́yìn tó níran rodo bí olú ọ̀gán mo dí ọmẹ́yìn tọ́pọ́n kan dẹ rodo bí olú ọ̀gán mẹ́yìn tó lórí ti ya gẹ́rẹ́gẹ́. àní fọmọ balẹ̀ wọ́n mọ̀ balẹ̀ láéláé yóò pẹ́ yóò yá ọmọ ọba yóò mọ̀ dàbúrò ọba àṣà bí òdì ọmọ ọba lù pàṣà. orí kọ́ládé àṣàmọ̀ṣe mọ́ fẹ́rẹ́lẹ́ ìyá mi kọ́ládé ọmọ ọlọ́rọ̀ alágogo. ìyá mi mú mi dọ́dọ̀ bàbá mi mú mi délé ìyá mi. tí ọba síkú létòdè ò lè pa ní obìnrin náà ló kó ní kò yẹ àkọ́kọ́ orí kọ́ládé àmọ̀ṣe mo lóhùn ní ráàrí ọmọ kọ́ládé ọmọ ọlọ́rọ̀ alágogo yémùṣẹ́wò ló mú àwògbólúwò orí kọ́ládé. ìjà ìwúyán ó ti dómù ọ̀dọ̀ tún ọ̀tún bẹ́ẹ̀ débẹ̀ ó di ìkàsí yòókù lóde ìpalẹ̀ yín ewúrẹ́ lọ́sọ̀nù ló mú nílé yín. ọ̀sẹ̀ mọ̀mọ́ mú lọ ní bàbá wa kí sẹ́gbẹ́ gbẹ́rangbẹ́ran ẹyẹ kan ọ̀sọ̀nù ló mú nílé kọ́ládé. àní mọ̀mọ́ mú lọ wá bàbá wa kí sẹ́gbẹ́ gbẹ́yẹgbẹ́yẹ obìnrin rọ̀bọ̀tọ̀ báyìí lọ́sọ̀nù ló mú nílé kọ́ládé. ẹ wá àmúlò mi mòrókó ńlá mi mú sọkọ ayaba mọ sọ̀rọ̀ mi ẹsẹ̀gbẹ̀rún ogójì lọ́nà òun. ọlọ́run ni ó bá wa ṣẹ́gun wọn ọlọ́run ni ó gbé wa lékè wọn alọ́lọ́run ni ó bá wa ṣẹ́gun wọn ọlọ́run ni ó gbé wa lékè wọn ọ̀rẹ́ tó fojú fẹ́ni tí ò dénú àtàwọn tá a fẹ́ tán ò fẹ́ràn ẹni o ọlọ́run ni ó bá wa ṣẹ́gun wọn Gàníyà.
ọlọ́run ni ó bá.
Hello, everyone. It's me, BRG, and I am here tonight, well, this evening, to talk about the history of Africa prior to colonization. When we talk about Africa in the United States, and this is not just among colonizers, okay? This is among Black people, ourselves. The discourse around Africa is that we did not have any civilization before Europeans came, and out of the goodness of their pale hearts, taught us how to live decently. And African people have always known that this is a myth. But one of the insidious consequences of slavery and colonization is that you cannot have educated people who are enslaved. You cannot have people who are aware of where they came from and what they and their ancestors did, and make slaves out of them. Okay, you're going to have revolts and rebellions, which we did have. But talking to the average, ordinary, everyday black person that was conditioned under this colonizer education system, we still think that Africa is poor, that it's always been poor. And some people on Twitter, or I guess the boar wants us to call it X now, is that slavery somehow benefited African people. So you should stream more early, dude. I'm not going to do that. I have a job. I have a job, and this is my off day, and I'm an evening/night person. But you are in luck because I upload stuff like this to YouTube, and you can also catch it on Twitch. But no, I'm not going to be streaming at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning, my time, because that don't work for me. Anyways, back to what I was originally discussing. Thankfully on YouTube, there's a lot of videos that talk about the ethnic groups that New Africans, black people in the United States, that are descended from enslaved people, came from. One of the major groups that pretty much every New African is descended from is the Yoruba people. I have Yoruba ancestry, and it's sad because, like, black people, Malcolm X consistently talked about this, like, do not really, like, have any organic ties to the groups that we originate from. Like, when you talk to a black person in the United States, they'll just tell you, oh, my ancestors are from Alabama, my ancestors are from Mississippi. It's like, no, your ancestors are from what is now Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Mali, all of these places with extremely different and varied cultures and advanced civilizations that developed in these places that many of us know next to nothing about. And there's also a lot of conspiracy theorist type groups that have gone hog-ass wild. They're talking about, oh, we were Moors. The Moors were basically Muslims that were centered around the northern coast. It used to be called the Barbary coast of Africa. And there were black Moors. But the groups that we were taken from, while many of them did end up becoming Moors, like, that is not the sum total of our history. Or people focus on Egypt and all of these other places. Egypt was a black civilization, but there is so much neglect towards the groups that we were taken from. When you're talking about the groups that black Americans were taken from, we were taken from the Yoruba, the Akan, the Igbo, the Dogon, the Mandinka. All of these groups have extremely rich histories, extremely rich ways of looking at the world and advanced civilizations. But we focus on the pyramids, and we focus on the Moors, and we, in many cases, engage in ahistorical behavior and ahistorical analysis and ignore the people that we're actually descended from. So, let's start out with a history of the Yoruba people. And when you talk about the Yoruba, like, their culture is still extremely dominant in traditional New African, traditional diaspora religion. Like, if you go to Brazil, you will hear many people in their religious ceremonies speaking Yoruba. Candomblé, Santeria, which is in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and all of these various syncretic African diasporic religious traditions have their roots in Yoruba religious practice, rather. So let's find out a little bit about the Yoruba people.
With another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And welcome back to my series, A Closer Look. Today, we're going to take a closer look at the Yoruba people. And as always, if you want to support the home team, you can do so on patreon.com. You'll have access to live streams where I discuss various topics, talk about sources, and much more. And I have some new rewards for you guys. Also, go to afrographics.com, a website where you can find unique illustrative infographics summarizing African history. All links to Patreon, Afrographics, and home team merchandise are in the description box below. The Yoruba people are one of the most popular ethnic groups in all of Africa. They're said to constitute about 44 million people, which makes them one of the largest ethnic groups in Africa. They're primarily located.
Note that he's talking about just like in Africa, like how many Yoruba descended people are in the diaspora. Like we got 44 million on the continent. You probably got another 44 million in the diaspora.
In southwestern Nigeria and parts of Benin. The legendary Yoruba city, Eife, is regarded by an overwhelming majority to be the source and the heart of the Yoruba nation. This fact, coupled with its impressive culture as demonstrated by its famous brass.
Those are, I don't think those are scarification marks, but a lot of groups in West Africa, it's a sign of maturity or a sort of beauty marker. Like they make these scars on their faces, which look like that. It's pretty cool. I wouldn't get it done, but I have a very low pain tolerance.
Stone and clay sculptures placed it in a position of preeminence among the Yoruba peoples. The belief that Oduduwa or Odua was the first king at Ele-Ife and that he was the father of the founding princes of other Yoruba kingdoms has inspired the description of the Yoruba as the Omo Odua or offspring of Odua. This would partially explain why Yoruba history, culture, and religion have centered on Ele-Ife. The origins of the Yoruba people are shrouded in mystery. However, 3 clear narratives are discernible from several versions. The first is from the Yoruba oral tradition and creation myth. The god, Olorun or sky god, let down a chain at Ele-Ife by which Oduduwa, the progenitor of the Yoruba people, and indeed of all men, descended carrying a rooster, some earth, and a palm kernel. Oduduwa threw the earth into the waters and the rooster scratched it to become land, out of which grew the palm tree with 16 branches, representing the 16 original kingdoms. Keep in mind that there are several versions of this myth. Also, every Yoruba town, lineage, and deity has its own myth of origin. Yet in all of them, Ele-Ife is regarded as a spiritual center. The second narrative of origin has it that the Yoruba are descended from the offspring of Lamurudu, or Nimrod of the biblical and Near Eastern legend, who had been banished and finally settled in present-day Yoruba land. Thus, some trace the origins of the Yoruba all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia, Uruk, or Babylon. A final narrative of origin has the Yoruba present in their modern homeland from as early as 10,000 BC. According to Robert Smith in his work Kingdoms of the Yoruba, archaeological digs have confirmed the existence of a human population in the Adenware area of Yorubaland since prehistoric times. The Yoruba are deeply religious people. Their pantheon of deities called the Orishas are rivaled only by Nile Valley civilization.
So later, probably next month, I'm going to do a video on why like Maoism has never really caught on in Africa. And he mentioned that the Yoruba people are an extremely religious people. I think one binding factor among Black people, whether on the continent or in the diaspora, is that we tend to be an extremely spiritual people. And is it sort of at contradiction with dialectical materialism for us to be religious? No. Kwame Nkrumah actually considered the spiritual nature of Black people to be one of our primary characteristics. And the way that a lot of Western communists approach organizing and approach looking at the world, it's sort of like it's Western. Western philosophy and a Western worldview kind of brushes up against the spiritual traditions of African people, both on the continent and in the diaspora. So if there is to be a sort of Africanized communism that takes advantage of and recognizes our past communal traditions. This isn't saying that we should throw dialectical materialism away, because it's still correct and it's still true, but we also have to give full play to the fact that Africans are a very spiritual people, and Mao taught us that we cannot simply trod all over the beliefs of the masses or seek to destroy them, because when you do that, you're engaging in a colonizer type fashion. That's what the British did. They went into Benin City and they sacked it. Like, you talk about the Benin bronzes that are still in the British Museum. I think they repatriated some of them, if not all of them. But they were in the British Museum. They were basically war trophies. This was war loot, and they stole it. They also fought with the Ashanti over the golden stool, which is basically the seat, the divine seat of the Ashanti, or basically the king of the Asante people. So we have to be very, very cautious and particular when we talk about the traditions of the African people, because there's a long and sad history of colonizers coming and spitting all over them and taking shit from them and trying to implant new worldviews. So we have to ensure that communism does not function, that Marxism, Leninism, Maoism does not function as simply a new colonizer ideology. So you can respect the ideas and history and spiritual traditions of a people while also struggling for communism. And that's the only way to do it when you're talking about Africa and African people.
The Yoruba religion is centered around an all-powerful creator god, which predates Christianity, the religion of many Yorubas today. They believe in the existence of a universal god called Olodumare or Olorun. It is through him that life is possible. In addition to Olodumare, there are other gods known as the Orisha, some of the most popular of these deities being Shango and Oshun. Shango is the god of thunder and lightning and the greatest Yoruba warrior. His weapon of choice is the double axe. Oshun, one of the wives of Shango, was the deity of the river, pleasure, sexuality, fertility, beauty, and love. Oshun is of great popularity and significance among Afro-descendant women across the world. Even Beyonce portrayed Oshun in her music video, Hold Up. In that video, she wears a flowing yellow dress, emerging behind two large golden doors amid a wave of fresh flowing water. Today, half of the Yoruba population practices their traditional religion, while the others practice either Christianity or Islam. One of the historical figures in Yoruba history was a female heroine called Moremi. Moremi was the wife of the then king of Ile-Ife, Obalara, who volunteered to be captured by enemy forces so that she could reveal the secrets of the Igbo invaders who camouflaged themselves. Legend has it that the Igbo, the Yoruba's neighbors, routinely raided Ile-Ife in desperation for food and women. The king, being helpless to stop these raids, was maligned by his subjects. This led Moremi to volunteer to be captured by the Igbos, and very soon she became the favorite wife of the Igbo king. In the heat of passion, the Igbo king revealed the secrets of his attacks on Ile-Ife to Moremi, after which she escaped and went back to Obalara, her husband, who then organized his men to ward off the annual Igbo attacks. Before Moremi left, she had promised the gods a sacrifice upon her successful return to Ile-Ife, but unfortunately, the gods demanded her only child. Queen Moremi complied and threw her daughter into the Oshun River, where she became the goddess Yamoja. In Yoruba religion, Yamoja is one of the goddesses worshipped today in Yorubaland and in Trinidad and Brazil. If Ile-Ife is understandably regarded as the spiritual center of the Yoruba, then Oyo is recognized as the political focal point of the Yoruba. Oyo became the most powerful of all Yoruba kingdoms. Frequent attacks from the Nupe and the Bariba compelled Oyo to reorganize its army into cavalry and infantry. The ruler, Shango, is credited with transforming the small polity into a kingdom, widely acknowledged among the Yoruba as a magician and warrior, he built up officials who played a significant role in Oyo's administration. One basic feature of the Yoruba-speaking peoples is urbanism. Each Yoruba town was an entity in itself. Government in each town was based on an unwritten or oral constitution of the people, in which spiritual matters were intrinsically tied with the physical world. At the head of the government,
So again, like you have this sort of intertwining between spirituality and politics that can be rightly said to be a determining characteristic of how African people, both at home and in the diaspora, look at the world. And again, what many communists try to do is to have this sort of totalizing materialist outlook, this static outlook that is disrespectful to the masses and sort of inhibits the ability to organize them because it tramples over their most deeply cherished and deeply held beliefs. And in the diaspora, this stuff comes straight from Africa. So basically, you're disrespecting the thousands of years of oral tradition in history that made us who we are as a people. Something else I was going to say. Yeah, it'll come back to me.
government was the Oba, or ruler, assisted by a council.
Oh yeah, there was a strike actually in my city of people whose job it was to shell pecans. You know, like pecans that go in pie, or you can eat them raw. Really good nuts. When you shell them, like you're running the risk of cutting your fingers and stuff like that. Well, there was a processing plant in my city, Funston Nut, I believe it was called, and a lot of black women worked there. This was back in the 30s. Okay, so communists intervened in this strike, and afterwards, one of the strikers was heard to say that she would have become a communist if the communists actually allowed her to have her Bible and sort of gave free play to her religion. And this is a struggle that communists are constantly going to run across. One thing that the Black Panther Party did very well was take into account our religious traditions. Okay, like all of these people grew up in the church. I think Huey Newton's dad was a Baptist minister, and Fred Hampton's radical tradition, the way that he talked, oratorical rather, tradition, the way that he talked, like there is a long history going all the way back to African griots of speech giving. Like that was how our history was transmitted by people whose job it was. Like these people were a caste. Their job was basically to memorize stories of the kings, stories of high-ranking nobles, stories of villages and towns and cities, and talk about these things. So there is a direct link between the griot tradition of oratory and the ways that black pastors talk. When they kicked those two black representatives out of the Tennessee State House, I cannot remember their names for the life of me, but when they kicked them out, one of them gave a speech and everybody's like, oh, he's trying to talk like Martin Luther King. Like, no, that is how black people talk when we give speeches, and it goes all the way back to Africa. That's why I laugh at these silly ass people who are like, oh, there's no link between Africa and people. Yes, there is. Like, it's right here in the way that we talk. Okay, African American vernacular English. What is the first word? African. Like the grammatical structure, everything is not 100%, but it is heavily African. The way that we structure our sentences. I'm a bee. We finna go. Like, that's African as fuck.
Called differently in various towns. Known as Oyo Messi in Oyo, it was headed by the Bosoroon, or prime minister, who was responsible to the Alafin, king of Oyo. In the African diaspora, Yoruba culture seems to have been better preserved than other African
Those are the scarification marks that I was talking about.
traditions, Unfortunately, a great number of enslaved Africans were of Yoruba stock. For example, a third of Africans enslaved
More scarification marks.
in Cuba. Today, Brazil has the largest number of Yoruba and Yoruba-descended people outside of Africa. Cuba has about 1 million, and Puerto Rico, Trinidad, and the rest of the Caribbean have about 500,000. One of the Yoruba who led the independence movement against the British was Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who together with other nationalist leaders like Dr. Nnamdi Ezekwe and Chief Anthony Anhoro fought the British for early independence and later became the first governor of Western Nigeria. He was probably the most respected leader of the Yoruba in living memory. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and want to help out in its continued production, you can do so on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself, remember your ancestors. Peace.
Alright, so Ile-Ife, basically the spiritual center of the Yoruba people. So this video is going to talk about like the genesis and the history of Ile-Ife. And there's another after this that talks about the palace and the ruler of this area. But the purpose again of me doing this video is to sort of put the lie to the people saying that Africa was nothing before slavery, that slavery helped black people. And there's going to be a sequel to this video where I talk about like what exactly slavery did to us. I already talked about it at the beginning of this video because it fucked us up. Like we did not know where we came from. And that is the worst thing you can do to a people, is to steal their history and have them thinking that they were apes swinging around in the trees or eating each other. Okay? If there was anybody that was doing that, it was Europeans. But, so yeah, you stole your history. They put you on plantations and treated you like shit. Like, Du Bois talks about, like, most slave owners were not like, oh, I'm just going to buy all of these people and just do horrible, horrible things to them because I'm a sadist. But slavery was a business, okay? It was a business. Your job was not to be a fully developed human being if you were a slave. Your job was to get out tobacco, rice, cotton, corn, indigo, whatever the fuck they had you growing, okay? So just that right there puts the lie to the horrible myth, which goes all the way back to the end of the Civil War. The whole lost cause myth, the happy darky myth, that everybody was happy on the plantations until the evil Yankees and carpetbaggers came. That's bullshit, okay? We come from a very, very well-developed region of the world, an urbanized region of the world. We did not need Europeans to teach us shit. We did not need Europeans to do anything but leave us the fuck alone. But them, being driven by the cold heart of capital, could not do that. So as a result, the links are still there, but they were frayed and they were tattered and they were torn. So what a lot of black people are doing nowadays is rediscovering this history and realizing that everything we were taught in school and the shit that DeSantis is trying to teach in Florida is bullshit. Absolute and entire bullshit.
Hey guys, I would like to use this opportunity to say a very big thank you to my first ever patron, Weepred. Thank you very much. If you like this video and would love to support this channel, you can do so on Patreon. Links to that will be in the description below. A like and subscription also goes a long way in supporting this channel. It will be very much appreciated. This video is the first.
Also, I encourage all of you to actually go on these creators' Patreons, and support them and engage with their work, because, like, especially if they're actually in Africa, or if they are in the Caribbean or Latin America. Like, I'm kind of privileged because I'm in the United States. I speak English. This guy does too. But, like, there's sort of a disconnect between black content creators in the first world and black content creators in the third world. It's like, we have the technology. Like, this is a fucking $400 microphone I've got right here. So it's important that those of us who are in the first world actually give support to our brothers and sisters and our comrades who are in the third world, because, like, it's really, really important to hear from them because it's the third world that feeds the first. And it would be ludicrous for me to sit up here and talk about Africa before colonization without actually giving support to Africans who are in Africa. Just a sort of, I don't know, 20-second spiel.
First part in a 4-part series. I hope you enjoy. I was about 10 years old when my fine art teacher showed me pictures of what I would later know to be an Ife bronze head. For a very long time I was in awe and wondered how these people from ancient Ife were able to pull off this level of details and liveness. It was like nothing I've ever seen before. I was in more disbelief when I discovered that these bronze heads, and sometimes life-size figurines, were not solid blocks of bronze, but castings made from a technique lost to.
Just imagine like the skill that it takes to make these sorts of things, okay? And what the Brits and a lot of other people did, a lot of other Europeans did when they discovered these things, they tried to attribute them to Arabs, or they tried to attribute them to lost European groups or something like that. They did the same thing when they discovered what we know to be called Great Zimbabwe. Well, that's what it's called. It has an indigenous Shona name, but I cannot pronounce it. So, or aliens. But anybody or any species but black people, like, they had to justify the fact that they were taking millions of us from our homelands, and they're like, oh, they couldn't build this shit. They couldn't. No way. They didn't have any iron. We're going to talk about iron later, because iron is sort of one of the key things necessary for the development of an advanced civilization. But like, they thought that we were like fucking, like, we were just squatting in the ruins of these long lost, disappeared ethnicities and empires. It's like going to London and saying that the Brits didn't build London. Well, they kind of didn't. Like, London has been around since fucking the European Iron Age. It's just basically been one group squatting on top of another. First you had the Bretons, then you had the Romans who came and fucked over the Britons, then you had the Anglo-Saxons who came and fucked over the Britons, then you had the fucking Normans. The history of the UK and England is just basically one group coming and fucking over another one. Anyways, yeah, they were so astounded by what they saw in our nations that they were like, there's no way they could do that. The Britons were Celts. Excuse me. Anyways, back to the history of Ile-Ife.
Time. Recently, my interest was piqued again while researching for another video. And this time I wanted to know who these people really were, and what type of civilization produced these works. This led me on a journey to discover a civilization that is one of the coolest I have ever come across. Today I will share with you my...
Look, these are all obviously sub-Saharan black African faces. Like, why the fuck would, I don't know, a fucking Arab dude or a European dude come here and, you know what, I'm just going to make a fucking bronze bust of a black person. Like, when people from cultures long ago make stuff like this, okay, these things are very expensive and time consuming to make. They tended to portray themselves. They tended to portray people and their families. They tended to portray kings. They tended to portray important people. People make art to look like them. Like, if you go to Ethiopia, what does Jesus look like? An Ethiopian dude. If you go to an African church in the United States, a progressive African church, Jesus is going to be black. You go to see Jesus in fucking Westminster Abbey, he's going to look like an Anglo-Saxon. Like, people portray their important figures as looking like them. Of course, we all know that Jesus was not black, he was not white, he was not any of these things. He was a brown-skinned Palestinian dude. So, even Lenin and Marx are black in East Africa. I did not know that. I know the Chinese called Marx Big Beard, Makasa.
Finds on how a village grew to become one of, if not the most influential empire in West Africa. This story begins 4,522 years ago in the Niger-Benue confluence, where the Benue-Kwa language-speaking people called home for thousands of years. This group of people included the Proto-Nupe, Proto-Akpa, Proto-Idoma, Proto-Tiv, Proto-Igbira, Proto-Bassa, Proto-Yoruba, Proto-Igala, and the Proto-Isekiri. This area allowed them to explore and discover new things, and hone in new skills, like the discovery, control, and exploitation of fire, which eventually led to the discovery of iron, which is a very interesting and important technological leap. The usual development of technology is the Stone Age to the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age. But for the people who live in the Niger-Benue confluence, there was an exception. The Iron Age came right after the Stone Age. In other words, they knew about the existence and production of iron towards the end of the first millennium, before bronze. During the pottery production process, clay pots are heated up to incredible temperature levels. This heating up leads to the formation of iron.
So basically, he's saying that West Africa sort of skipped the Bronze Age and moved straight into the production of iron. Every European civilizations, they had Stone Age, where you're basically hacking at a rock until it makes something sharp enough to kill a mammoth or something, or another European, and then you develop from that to bronze, and then from that you develop iron. West Africa, this area around Ile-Ife, the Yoruba people, etc., moved straight from bronze, moved straight from stone to iron, and he's going to explain how it was a consequence of them developing pottery and using pottery, and they were basically applying the products of this to the manufacture of iron. It's pretty cool. It's like playing Civ in real life.
Bloom, which at first was tossed away until its usefulness was recognized. The discovery of iron allowed for easier clearing of farmlands, revolutionalizing agriculture. By the beginning of the 4th century BC, the northern trade winds pushed further south, bringing in cold air from the northern hemisphere for a longer period of the year. This prolonged dry season disrupted the rainfall pattern, and when rain did fall, it arrived with a powerful force. It was heavy and caused damaging erosion to the soil, which was already parched from the heat. Within a few decades, a significant ecological change was brought on by the accumulation of these prolonged spells of low annual precipitation, which led to a recession in the fertile floodplains of the river Niger. What had begun was a climatic event dubbed the Big Dry, and would continue for the next 600 years. The change
It's also the name of Ben Shapiro's wife.
in climate did have an effect on the Benue speaking people.
I'm sorry, this is supposed to be a serious stream, but I had to get that one in.
Hunting grounds were no longer as productive as wildlife population declined drastically. These problems were compounded by the drying up of streams and rivers that fed this area, which forced the migration of the Proto-Yoruba out of the Niger-Benue Valley in search of better locations that could support their population. So over the coming centuries, the Proto-Yoruba migrated out of the Niger-Benue Valley, spreading to the south and west of their ancestral homeland, settling down along the way, founding different settlements. This fragmented the Proto-Yorubas into distinct dialects and subcultures among themselves, and also differentiated them further from the Benue speaking cousins. Some groups migrated into the thickest forest, south of the river Niger, and occupied a considerable stretch of coastal lagoon territory, while others migrated as far as modern-day Togo. Towards the end of the first millennium, some of them settled in the heartlands, west of the Niger-Benue Valley, on an elevated but poorly drained basin, surrounded by hills. This area was perfect for them, as the valley was swampy and seasonally flooded. The people who settled in this area called it Ile-Ife. Their settlements and farmlands were concentrated in the woodland slopes of the hills, where the soil was well drained and fertile. The people of Ile-Ife were not the first group of humans to occupy these lands. The Ugbo are considered the first aboriginals of these lands. They fished, hunted, and foraged in the swamp.
This is basically, we're watching a bunch of videos, about 12, about Africa, like what Africa was like, what civilizations did we build before European colonialism and the what we call the Mafa, the Great African Holocaust, the slave trade, which disrupted our process of development. Because a bunch of imbeciles on Twitter are talking about how slavery improved the livelihoods of black people. So the question is like, what was our livelihood like before we were brought here? U.S. schools aren't going to teach that. Why would this country built on slavery, and that in many cases, and matter of fact, fuck in many cases, in all cases, is still dependent on the labor of black people in subpar, subpaid, dangerous conditions? Why would they teach us where we come from? Your enemy is not going to teach you where you come from. That's why it's up to you to learn where you come from.
swamps and streams in the valley. The people of Ife and the Igbo people traded with each other, as the ecological condition must have encouraged them to do so. Nevertheless, when Ife's population surpassed that of the Igbo, competition for the valley's lands and resources was only a matter of time. The people of Ife lived in large family house complexes, called Agbole, which was the simplest unit of socio-political organization at the time, usually consisting of multiple extended families, who worked on the same farm settlements. The Agbole consisted of dwelling units built within a courtyard. When the population of the Agbole outgrew it, families broke off to start a new Agbole, but remained tied and subservient to the original Agbole. Over time, the quality and structural integrity of the Agbole were improved. Anthropomorphic and animal idioms were carved into the eaves, while murals called Iwokwe were painted on the verandas as ways to beautify the Agbole. The beautification of an Ebi's Agbole became a form of competition and differentiation of one family from the other. Other forms of differentiation included the use of facial scarification and oriki, which are short poems of a family's ancestral.
He's talking about Ile Ife, basically the spiritual home of the Yoruba people. And he's talking about how this place came to be. And it's sort of a even deeper dive than the previous video we watched.
Lineage. The members of an Agbole also shared the same ritual practices, deities, ancestors, and taboo. The Agbole gave its members access to land as it could ensure the security and safety of the farmlands from either competing families or hostile immigrants into the area. The oldest man was usually the leader of the Agbole, except in cases where there was a male who had great exploits, like a victorious warrior, successful farmer, or hunter. They were called Olori Agbole and were either elected, selected, or gained power through a violent usurpation. They were responsible for the welfare of the members of the Agbole by assembling, redistributing, and managing the resources of the Agbole in form of labor and land. They were conduits for social welfare and opportunities for the members of the Agbole. This role allowed the Olori Agbole to have surpluses, which he used to cover the cost of his political position and the welfare of less privileged members of the Agbole, as not all members were considered equal along age, gender, hereditary, accomplishment, or a B affiliation. There were also religious leaders and custodians of the shrines, as they were thought to be able to calm the primordial spirits, since they could mediate with their ancestors. Their claim to power was usually the possession of totems, which usually belonged to the founder of the Agbole. These totems were passed down through each succeeding Olori Agbole. Replicas were made which members of the Agbole kept as symbols of their house. They were nothing short of rulers, chief priests, judges, and enforcers of law and order. New members were recruited into the Agbole, primarily through marriage. Marriage was exogamous
Burn Everything, History of Ile Ife, Part 1.
and encouraged a peaceful relationship between houses. This was an important social innovation, as it laid the groundwork for the next step of social-political organization. The Olori Agbole, however, could increase his ranks through fictitious kingships, which ensured he could win votes if or when his position of authority was challenged. As the population of Ife grew, competition for farmlands intensified. Alliances began to form between houses. 2 or 4 houses merged together to become mega houses. However, already powerful houses became mega houses through the forceful coercion of weaker houses. These dramatic events transitioned Ile Ife into an house society, where the mega house was the largest socio-political unit. In early Ife, there were about 13 mega houses, or
This is something like I'd really love to see a Game of Thrones type show about like Ile Ife and the like struggles between the various houses. Like when you think about political intrigue and stuff like that, it's always about like stank ass European feudalism. Like I want to see some stuff about Ethiopia. I want to see some stuff about Ile Ife. I want to see some stuff about the fucking Zulu. Like anything to break the colonial European stranglehold on our minds.
settlements. They were separated by woodlands ranging from a few hundred meters to about a kilometer. These mega houses were headed by an alpha house, which the leaders from the minor houses reported to.
Oh yeah, Somalia as well. Like Somalia has a very, it's really based on clans. Like you have clans, family groups that in many cases have their own militias. Like a lot of the warfare that was taking place over there in the 90s and 2000s, that was between clans. And then you had an ineffective national government, and you had clans that ran huge swaths of the country.
The Deta mega house, for example, was made up of an house,
Basically, warlordism and feudalism.
of a house and 3 minor houses. These mega houses could be likened to mini states, with political heads equatable to a king. Hello, welcome to the end of the video. If you enjoyed what you just saw, please leave a like and share this video around. Remember to subscribe to just.
Hello everyone, welcome to.
All right, so I saw The Woman King. It's good, like a lot of the stuff is good from educational for entertainment value. Like that's what movies are made to do. Like movies that make a shitload of money. A lot of Somali immigrants in Minneapolis, yes, but like these movies are made to entertain you and make money. So The Woman King is a very good entertainment movie. I've read critiques from a lot of people that were like, "Oh, this is not how shit really was." Like, it's a movie. Shit is not like how it really was, because like that's not the job of a film. Like I reviewed that I watched Marxist Paul's review of how to blow up a pipeline. Like, of course they're not going to teach you how to blow up a pipeline, because they don't want you going around blowing up pipelines, but they know that radical chic is what's in. So yeah, they're going to try to cater to the woke progressive audience. Well, progressives don't run around trying to blow up pipelines. Those are radicals. But yeah, it's all about money. It's to entertain you, not to educate you.
On this palace right here is Eife in Osun State, and I'm here to show you the beautiful palace of Oni of Ife. That is the #1 ruler of Yoruba land. We're going to tour around. So I've seen the guards and they decided to take me around. So guys, this is the entrance and we are going in now.
I did not see that. That's the latest Boots Riley flick. No, I haven't seen that yet. I might watch it tonight though.
All right, guys, that is awesome.
So that's the palace of the Uni, the ruler, the king of Ile-Ife, and I guess the sort of spiritual ruler of all Yoruba people. It's pretty nice.
Palace. I'm not sure if I can go in.
Granted, I really hate the trend in discourse around African origins and where we came from in African history to focus on kings and lords and stuff like that. At the end of the day, even though they were indigenous, they're still exploiters, okay? Like, these dudes would, if you, I don't know, stole a jug of palm wine and you got caught, they would they'd cut your fucking hand off. Like, these are still very, very brutal people. But at the same time, knowledge of this is important to drive away the myth. And of course, like many of the most virulent, vicious racists, they're still going to believe that we had no civilization, we had no culture. But this is important for us, for our psychological well-being and mental health, to know that we came from people who in many instances, in all instances, were great and had developed civilization, in many cases long before Europe had. But like, would I want to live under an authoritarian ruler who is basically a dictator or a godhead? Absolutely not. I'm still a communist.
There, so we still have a few things here. And there is a police station over there, and look at that statue. So let's keep going. That's the king.
Orúkọ mi ni Ọládélé Ọládòsù tí mo jẹ́ MSA Ọ̀ọ̀ni. Ibi tí a wà yìí tẹ́ wọlé sí ó jẹ́ orírun gbogbo ilẹ̀ Yorùbá. Òun fi ń kí ọba wa ní olórí aládé gbogbo. Ibi tẹ́ wà yìí MSA court yìí. MSA court a ní ilé ìgbẹ́jọ́ 4. Tẹ́ pé ẹjọ́ tí wọ́n bá dá níbi MSA court yìí, bọ́ bá gbé dé court, òun náà ni wọ́n máa dá níbẹ̀. Tó dẹ̀ ní sí pé wọ́n ṣe èrò níbẹ̀. Tí ó bá tẹ́nìyẹn lọ́rùn, a tún wá gbé lọ sọ́dọ̀ àwọn aishif. Báyá wọ́n ń jà lélẹ̀ tàbí pé wọ́n jẹra wọn lówó, àdìmọ̀bá wọn yanjú ẹ̀ ní tribune yìí. Tí wọ́n bá wá di pé kò tẹ́ wọn lọ́rùn gẹ́gẹ́, àwọn á gbé lọ sọ́dọ̀ kábíyèsí aláṣẹ. ọba wa Adéyẹyẹ nìtàn Ògúnwùsì agbẹ́sọ̀dọ̀ Ọọ̀ni tí wọ́n á gbé dọ́dọ̀ bàbá tán tí bàbá rí pé àwọn ẹni yìí pé ó ti fẹ́ máa mú ẹ̀tanú dání bíi pé kó máa para wọn sódì bẹ́ẹ̀ bàbá wa ní pé ká mọ̀ lọ sí ilé àṣẹ náà pè ní Temple of Wisdom. Ilé àṣẹ yìí ó pín sí oríṣi méjì. Ilé àṣẹ yẹn téèyàn bá ń jẹ owó tàbí pé ó tọ̀ ń jalè tó bá yẹ pé òun jalè àwọn kó tọ̀ lọ pé àwọn fámílì ẹ̀ wà gbogbo wọn wà níbẹ̀ àwọn á mú lọ sí ìdí ògùn yẹn gbogbo nǹkan tó yẹ kán ṣe wọn á ṣe fún un tí wọ́n bá wá sí bẹ́ẹ̀ tán tó tọ̀ bá búra èké.
So he's basically laying out the pre-colonial legal system in the areas around Ile-Ife that the Yoruba people were governed by.
Ó máa kú before 7 days. Wow. Tí ìbá dẹ̀ ṣàdúrà ń bẹ́ẹ̀ náà gbogbo àwọn alágbára ní Nàìjíríà wọn wá ń wá síbẹ̀ wọn wá ń pray tẹ́pẹ́ àdúrà wọn náà jẹ́ ẹ̀mú gbà. Lẹ́rọ̀ tá ń sọ lọ ẹ̀bùrà tó wà nílé Ifẹ̀ ó jẹ́ 401.
401.
Bẹ́ẹ̀ ni ṣùgbọ́n ní 401 yẹn sẹ́yìn pé orírun ní bíbá yìí àwọn 200 tó kù wọ́n ti káàkiri gbogbo ìlú. Sódì bẹ́ẹ̀ wọ́n ti lọ ilé tó tẹ Pẹ̀tùdé ilé tó tẹ Ìlísàdó ilé tó tẹ Ìbàdàn dó káàkiri àgbẹ̀ ṣùgbọ́n nísàlẹ̀ nínú 201 tó kù ẹyọ kan wà ń bẹ̀ òun náà ń pè ní Ọọ̀ni kì í kú síbẹ̀ ẹ̀wọ̀n ọdún 200 lára wọn ni ilé wa orúkọ ilé náà ń pè ní Òrìgì Ọlọ́fin. Òrìgì Ọlọ́fin. Sátọ̀dé àkọ́kọ́ ni wọ́n máa ń ṣe nínú oṣù kẹfà gbogbo tí bá ti rí kinní yìí ẹ ti mọ̀ pé babaláwo tó gbóná ó wà nínú ilé yẹn ni Sátọ̀dé àkọ́kọ́ ni wọ́n máa ń bọ Ifá Ọọ̀ni tí àwọn kan tó máa ń bọ fọ́ ni kinní àwọn bíi ìgbín gbogbo rẹ̀ àti erinlá àwọn náà máa fi ń bọ bá tó bọ Ifá Ọọ̀ni tán.
Kí ni
erinlá yẹn ó ti yá àwọn tí dàbí màálù kò ní òwò lórí òun náà pè ní erinlá ó máa tóbi gan àwọn náà máa pa sínú àìsè àwọn nǹkan yẹn after àgbà yẹn tí wọ́n ti wá ṣe ètùtù yẹn tán tí wọ́n di àwọn òyìnbó gbogbo náà wọ́n máa wá Sátọ̀dé ọ̀kọ́ yẹn ibi tí mo pè ní ìdí ògùn láàdì yẹn èrò máa pọ̀ láti máa ṣe prayer àdúrà nǹkan ìkú dẹ̀ ń gbà after àgbà tí bàbá ti ṣe tí wọ́n ti ṣe ọdún yẹn tán gba ẹnu gbogbo wọn babaláwo káàkiri àgbáláyé gba ẹnu tó nóró láti lọ máa sọ pé mo fẹ́ sọdún Ifá bí ìyẹn ṣe jẹ́ nìyẹn.
So just explained everything to us. Now we're moving to another place.
Sẹ́rí ibi tí a wà yìí náà ń pè ní ilé ńlá ní ayé àtijọ́ inú ayére ni bíbá yìí wà pé bí àwọn àti bàbá sẹ́yìn pé ìgbà tó dún ńlá sa Adésọjí ọba Adérẹ̀mí àwọn náà tún bíbá yìí ṣe fún àti máa jókòó pé tí wọ́n bá yé dájọ́ tàbí kan bá ní àlejò ọba Adésọjí Adérẹ̀mí ó jẹ gọ́vnà ó dẹ̀ jẹ Ọọ̀ni láyé Western Region àwọn náà tún bíbá yìí ṣe àwọn olóyè apá ọ̀tún rẹ̀ àwọn olóyè apá ìlẹ̀ obìnrin wà nínú àwọn obìnrin yẹn náà máa ń pè ní ìyálóde bẹ́ẹ̀ bàbá tó wà mẹ́rin ní bẹ́ẹ̀ ní ilé bàbá wa Ọọ̀ni of Ifẹ̀ ọba Adéyẹyè ẹni.
It looks like an Issa sword. Like they would take swords like that and they would poison with certain plants and the secretions put out by certain animals. And like you got cut with those, even if it's just like a little nip, your blood would be poisoned. It would fuck you all the way up, and then you'd eventually die, screaming in agony. Ile-Ife is the place, and the Yoruba are the people. Yes. Also, I remember reading in a slave narrative from the actual last living person that was transported to the United States, Cujo Lewis. The book that Zola Neale Hurston put together was called Barracoon. But he said that he was a peasant because his people didn't have ivory by their door. So ivory, elephant tusks, were seen as being signs of royalty or nobility among a lot of West African groups. So you can see this is where the king lived. So here's his ivory over the door. The sword and elephant that ivory comes from, another sign of nobility and royalty.
Ọ̀gágá di second bàbá tó wà níbẹ̀ ni president ní ilé nǹkan tó wà lórí bàbá tẹ́wọ̀ yìí náà ń pè ní adéarè ọ̀rẹ́ tí mo sọ lẹ́ẹ̀kan yẹn ó ní bàbá fi ju gbogbo lọ́ba lọ adé yìí kì í ṣe pé à ń gbé lọ sí òde inú ìnáwó tó sọ pé à ń gbé lọ sí ilé ibi kan ẹ̀ẹ̀kan lọ́dún ló máa ń jáde ẹni tó bá dẹ̀ jẹ́ ọ ni ìbá àsọmọ 18 years 20 years tí wọ́n bá ti ń gbé lé orí sáìsì orí ẹ̀ ó máa ń ṣe rẹ́gí lórí ẹ̀ ó ń wo ní báàgì sìmẹ́ǹtì kan 50 kg ṣùgbọ́n tó bá ti ra àwọn kan tutù rẹ̀ àwọn àna sí níbi tó wà wọ́n ní pé àna sílẹ̀ kò jẹ́ tí wọ́n ti wá sí gbogbo àwọn ẹran kejì tó yẹn tán àwọn ajẹ́ kó yé ara yẹn ara yìí tó ti wúwo ní 50 kg yẹn àwa fúyẹ́ tí ara yẹn bá ti fúyẹ́ àwọn agbé ara yìí àwọn agbélé bàbá lórí tí bàbá bá ń lọ ẹ máa rí kójú bàbá ó máa white yẹn kábíyèsí aláṣẹ wọ́n máa ń pa àwọn kan ní lókolóko tí ẹ bá fẹ́ kọ̀ fáàmù ní ọjọ́ yẹn tí ẹ bá wá láti wá ṣe ayẹyẹ fún ọdún ọlọ́jọ́ tí ẹ bá nà kàárín sí ara yẹn pé ìwà rẹ̀ yìí o mo rí ọlọ́dún yìí o kí n tún rí ọlẹ́mí o ìkan báyìí ni mo fẹ́ kẹ́ fi ṣàdúrà àdúrà yín dẹ̀ máa gbà after gbà yẹn tí bàbá wọn padà bọ̀ sẹ́yìn kójú ọba wá tìgbà tó lọ gbogbo àdúrà tí àwọn èèyàn ti ṣe yẹn ó tún máa heavy ó tún máa padà sí àyẹ̀ táìmù gbà yẹn ojú wa máa change táìmù gbà yẹn náà ń pè àwọn lókolóko tó máa múra ní wákà àwọn kìnìún yẹn àwọn ló bó òdúdú ọ̀rọ̀ wàásù sálọ ayé àwọn yẹn náà máa ń mú àtòrí dání àtòrí tó bá mú dání yẹn wọ́n ní láti máa tí lọ́jọ́ ọ̀nà fún bàbá sẹ́yìn pé kí ni 50 kg ó ti wo fún bàbá láti gbé bẹ́ẹ̀ ni ó ti kìtìrò kékeré bàbá láti máa sáré padà lọ síbi tí wọ́n ti là gbé nǹkan yẹn sílẹ̀ ó jẹ́ bí ti.
So you're looking at you're looking at a ceremony that's been going on for hundreds, if not 1,000 years. And like, as a communist, you realize that this stuff is metaphysics. There's no spirits that inhabit places. Or there may be, who knows? But like the arrogance that a lot of Western communists have, this is laying a really, really good foundation for my video on why Maoism never really took off in Africa. Like, where exactly is the communist movement in Benin or Nigeria, places like this? I'm not talking about the revisionist Soviet puppet state that they had. Like, where are the masses in their millions actually throwing down and fighting against? Like, Nigeria is an extremely, extremely corrupt country. So communism is needed there, but it has to be an organically African, an organically Yoruba, and there's various other ethnic groups, an organically Igbo communism that takes into account the religious traditions of the people and doesn't disrespect them, but also struggles against metaphysics and idealism and superstition. But it has to be a peaceful struggle. It has to be a struggle of political education. In no way would communists be justified in going and smashing this place up. Like, this is thousands of years of culture. Many of this stuff is cool, but it belongs in a museum. It does not belong in a museum in Europe, or it doesn't belong at the bottom of the Bay of Lagos. So there's definitely a place to honor religious and ethnic and cultural tradition without giving thorough full play to it and becoming sort of, I guess you could call them, cultural revisionists or cultural revanchists that want to go back to exactly how things were. This is a struggle that I imagine a lot of indigenous comrades in the United States have as well.
Símbọ̀ ìrìn tó wà ń bẹ̀ nínú àwọn ọba 50 tí wọ́n ti wájà a rí bẹ́ẹ̀rẹ̀ àwọn èèyàn mẹ́rin a rí àjàgún láwárí kan ọ̀ọ̀ni a rí ọ̀pọ̀kùn adésújú adé àkọ́kọ́ olúbùṣe wà a dẹ̀ tó rí ti sa adésọjí adérẹ̀mí ọjọ́ mẹ́ta àwọn ọmọ yóò jẹ gọ́vnà tí wọ́n ti jẹ ọ̀ọ̀ni ẹlẹ́kẹrin ni bàbá olúbùṣe kejì.
I'm just looking at that door. Like, just imagine the hours of labor that it took to produce something like that.
Olúbùṣe kejì ìyẹn bá ọkùn adésújú adé àwọn náà ṣe number 4 sẹ́yìn pé àwọn tó máa fi jẹ ọba àwọn alágbára ni àwọn alágbára yẹn bí kan du afẹ́fẹ́ bí kan domi bí kan dọ̀tá sódì wọn bí àárín yẹn bí ó ṣe jẹ́ nìyẹn láti gbà yẹn ẹni tó wá ti wá pa erin àwọn akó erin yẹn ìwo méjì yẹn àwọn akó wá fún royal bless ọ̀nì àwa ṣàdúrà fún tí wọ́n bá ti wá ṣàdúrà fún tán àdúrà ń tọ̀ dẹ́ máa gbà àwọn àgbà ní ọwọ́ ẹ̀ méjì kìíní ìkan wà nísàlẹ̀ ìkan confam ní original ní ìwo erin yìí.
There's a pretty substantial hunk of Maoists in Turkey as well, but yeah, it's majorly a Latin American and East Asian thing. There were Maoists in Palestine. I think they were called the DFLP, but yeah, like there have been Maoist influence or Mao Zedong thought influenced groups in Africa, but like there's never really been a proper Marxist-Leninist Maoist synthesized after 1980 party, never mind the People's War in Africa. So doing some research on a video for that.
Sẹ́ni ní ayé àtijọ́ kò sí pé báyẹ̀ pé kò sí fọ́tò kò sí pé wọ́n jà ń pè sórí fóònù ṣùgbọ́n ní ayé àtijọ́ gbogbo kan tí wọ́n ṣe ló wà lára lẹ́kùn yìí àwọn ẹrú lélẹ̀ síbẹ̀ tó máa ń dáná sẹ́ni lè Ilé-Ifẹ̀ a máa ń mọ ẹmu gan ṣùgbọ́n kò sí ìrànmọ́fẹ̀ tó máa kó máa mọ ẹmu tó máa dá ẹmu tó máa gbọ́n ọ̀pẹ àlejò ló máa ń dẹ́mu fún Ifẹ̀ àlejò ló máa ń dẹ́mu fún Ilé-Ifẹ̀ bí wọ́n ti mọ̀ ọ̀daràn láyé àtijọ́ ilé wọ́n máa kiri di ọwọ́ ọ̀daràn wọ́n máa dì ní ẹ̀yìn ni wọ́n máa kí bàbá wa ní oríkì kan pé.
In Barracoon, Cujo Lewis talked about how they executed a murderer in his area that he came from in Africa. The king ordered the murderer tied, like his face was facing the dead guy's face, and they basically turned their backs on him. They ignored him, and they tied him up like that, and it tied him up real tight. He was losing air, and the guy, he was crying out, "Can I have some water?" And the king was like, "Why does a dead man want water? Can you cut me free?" He's like, "Why does a dead man want to be free?" So, yeah, they did not really abide criminals and thieves and murderers and all sorts of other horrible things. African justice is a motherfucker. Maybe we should have applied some of it to the slave owners.
Wọ́n ní alẹ́ sí mọ́gun wọn ni ìtumọ̀ ẹni pé bàbá lẹ́sìn ṣùgbọ́n bàbá ò lè gbẹ̀sìn wọ́n máa ń gbẹ̀sìn fún bàbá ni. Kí ló dé? Ọ ní ò lè gbẹ̀sìn sẹ́yìn pé kó gbẹ̀sìn kó lọ lẹ mọ́lẹ̀ bàbá ò lè gbẹ̀sìn wọ́n máa gbẹ̀sìn fún bàbá ni só ti ń bẹ̀rẹ̀ bàbá dẹ̀ ń fún wọn ní owó wọn. Àwọn ọdẹ lélẹ̀ ìyá rí pé nígbà tẹ wọlé sí báyìí ẹ ti máa rí bí ẹyẹlé a ní ẹyẹlé kì í bónílé jẹ kó míló bónílé mu kó wá dọjọ́ kó wá yẹrí bẹ́ẹ̀ ni túmọ̀ ẹni sẹ́dílé ilé ẹ tún máa wo orí ọ̀dọ̀ bàbá pé ìjàlá tí wọ́n máa ṣe kí wọ́n máa pariwo ọmọ yìí kábíyèsí kìnnì kan ilé ìjẹ a ní ẹni bá gbé kàkàkí ọba ìbò ló ti fẹ́ fọ́n sẹ́wọ́n kò sì tó ti máa fọ́n ibi bá ti fọ́n lọ́wọ́ lọ́tọ́ máa pé kàkàkí ọba bá ti gbé lọ ibi bẹ́ẹ̀ ló wà bí ìyẹn ti jẹ́ nìyẹn sẹ́yìn náà yàtọ̀ kò sí mọ́tò kò sí machine ọkùnrin tó bá ní egun wọ ní àkún wọ ní bàtà owó tó máa lò àwọn náà máa gbé kànyẹn sẹ́yìn bí tẹ́ wà yìí umbrella lélẹ̀ kò sẹ́mọ̀ tó gbọ́dọ̀ dé umbrella wá sínú ààfin yìí lẹ́yìn bàbá wa nìkan lẹ́yìn ọ̀ọ́ni nìkan ọ̀bàdé ẹ̀yẹ nìkan fún oṣù títí di òní tí èyí bá ń bọ̀ láti ẹ̀rùn gate àti máa rí a máa lọ bá pé arábìnrin pa umbrella rẹ̀ yìí tó bá so lórí kó bá sórí kòkun a máa ní pé kó lọ ra sànà wá fún ara rẹ̀ a wá sáná sí fún ara rẹ̀ umbrella yìí máa jó bàbá nìkan ni ó rẹ̀ fẹ́ yálà òòrùn mú ni yálà òjò ń rọ̀ ni bàbá nìkan ló gbọ́dọ̀ lo umbrella náà fẹ́yìn àwọn ọdẹ ilé wọ́n ní bàbá ṣẹ́dẹ́ àwọn eléyìí before Nigeria police àwọn yẹn náà máa ń pè ní akọ́dà yẹn àwọn náà máa ń wọ ṣòkòtò pé àti àwọn yẹn ni normal lọ ń múyàn normal lọ arrest èèyàn nígbà yẹn before Nigeria police kí àwọn ọlọ́pàá tó dé ṣẹ́dẹ́ eléyìí pidán pidán yẹn tí bàbá bá ní àlejò wàá máa pidán kí bàbá tó jáde sẹ pé ẹlòmíì ti lè máa sùn ṣùgbọ́n tí wọ́n bá ti ń pidán kan yọ ọ́nà lẹ́nu kan sí gbogbo ẹ̀ sẹ́yìn pé kò sẹ́ni tó bá fẹ́ sùn wọ́n máa rẹ́rìn títí bàbá tó máa wá dá wọn lóhùn. eléyìí náà pè ní amókùn yẹn ìtumọ̀ ẹni pé kò.
This just shows the importance of oral history. Like, this dude has all of this stuff in his head. Like, you look at it without knowing any of this, it's just a very ornate door. But like, each and every one of these symbols has a meaning, and he knows his meaning. And his job is basically to relay the meaning behind this centuries-old door to people that come and visit the palace. Many of these cultures, they did not write things, so this was how they told their history, where they were from, how they marked great deeds that were done by a certain warrior, by a certain king, and yeah, it's pretty cool.
Mọ́tò láyé àtijọ́ kò sí ṣọ́pà kò sí plane kò sí nǹkan kankan àwọn yẹn ọkùnrin bíi mẹ́rin géńdé méjì wájú méjì lẹ́yìn àwọn máa gbé kábíyèsí làkébí tí ń dá fíìmù àwọn máa gbé kábíyèsí títí lọ sí ìrìnàjò tí a bá ń lọ nígbà yẹn lọ. ṣẹ́dá àwọn tó wà ń sàlẹ̀ yẹn tẹ bá lórí ìkejì mi àtúndé mi ẹni tó bùlà ń jẹ mẹsẹ̀ ẹni tó ń bùlà ó ń jẹ mẹsẹ̀ ẹni tó bùlà ó ń jẹ mẹsẹ̀ ó dẹ̀ ní agboolé kọ̀ọ̀kan tí wọ́n ti ń jẹ ẹmẹsẹ̀ ibẹ̀ náà tó máa mú ẹmẹsẹ̀ wá sí àfi pé ọmọ bíbí àbẹ́ fẹ́ jẹ ẹmẹsẹ̀ o tó bá nẹ̀tọ̀ sí wọn fi jẹ́ bí èèyàn ṣe. ìtumọ̀ ẹmẹsẹ̀ tẹ béèrè yìí ìtumọ̀ ẹni pé àwa ni là ń sọ bàbá wa Adéyẹyẹ ní Tòǹgbòsì àwa ni ní traditional guard to all ni bí èèyàn ti jẹ́ ní any question.
ṣé ẹ lè sọ fún wa ta ni olórí ọba ilẹ̀ Yorùbá?
ẹni tó jẹ́ olórí ọba ilẹ̀ Yorùbá ni bàbá wa Ọọ̀ni of Ifẹ̀ ọba Adéyẹyè Ẹnìtàn Ògúnwùsì Ọ̀jájá the second bàbá wa ní olórí aládé gbogbo gẹ́gẹ́ bí wọ́n sọ lẹ́ẹ̀kan yẹn ni pé àrè tó wà lórí bàbá kì í ṣe pé kí wọ́n máa ń gbé lọ sí òde ẹ̀ẹ̀kan lọ́dún ló máa ń jáde ó ní bàbá fi ju ó ní bàbá wa Adéyẹyè Ẹnìtàn Ògúnwùsì Ọ̀jájá the second ó ló fi ju gbogbo lọ́ba lọ.
So this is a state residence, and these people are just out there hanging out and stuff. Like, imagine doing it at the White House or Buckingham Palace. Just shows how accessible he tries to be to the masses. Like, you just got people that are just sitting around hanging out. It's pretty cool. Shows how informal West African societies are.
New Palace ní àbísà. The sun is not in our favor at all. We're done at the palace, and right now we are at Moremi Ajashoro. Here is Moremi Ajashoro statue, and this is the beautiful place they did for her. We actually paid to get in here, and in the palace we paid a lot, man. Anyway, it was worth it. We learned a lot about our culture. The statue is 47 feet tall. Wow, that's really tall. Shagun is right there, and it looks pretty small. Look at Shagun beside the statue. Oh, that's crazy small. Anyway, we have to climb, and if we want to climb, I will have to off my sneakers. So let's go up and see. So guys, a little stairs to climb. That's Shegun behind the statue. This is Morimi Ajashoro.
ìtàn Mọ́remí ní ṣókí a máa sọ fún yín. Mọ́remí jẹ́ ọmọ bíbí ìlú Ilé-Ifẹ̀ nígbà wáṣẹ̀. Ọmọ Ifẹ̀ náà ni Mọ́remí o, ṣùgbọ́n Mọ́remí ó bí ọmọ kan ṣoṣo tí wọ́n pè ní Olórogbo. Nígbà wáṣẹ̀ tí àwọn àlejò máa ń wá láti ọmọ ajalè nílùú Ilé-Ifẹ̀. Nígbà tí wọ́n wá sí ìlú Ilé-Ifẹ̀, káràkátà ni arábìnrin yìí ó wá rí pé ń dùn pé báwo ni wọ́n fẹ́ máa kó àwọn ọmọ bàbá wọn ní ọrú ní ọjọ́ Òjìgbò mẹ́kùn. Ibẹ̀ ni tí máa ń kó àwọn èèyàn gbà yẹn lọ. Ọjọ́ márùn-ún náà máa ń ná ọjà yẹn. Ó wá fi ara rẹ̀ dúró ọ̀kú tó fi ara rẹ̀ sílẹ̀ ó fẹ́ kan kéjì ó tọ́lé aláwo lọ. Àwọn ni pé tó wá fi ọmọ kan ṣoṣo tó bí tó jó Olórogbo pé tó bá fi sílẹ̀ bẹ́ẹ̀ ni kó wọ́n máa ṣẹ́gun. Ó wá mú ọmọ ẹ̀ ìgbà tó lọ sí wọ́n á mú wọn kó náà papá mọ́ra. Mọ́remí dẹ̀ fáìn. Bí Mọ́remí yìí bó ti lọ sí ọ̀dọ̀ wọn sàmúdé wájú ọba lọ́jọ́ àwọn olórí ibẹ̀. Àwọn ní pé obìnrin ló fẹ́ràn tó yè kó o máa fi ṣe aya. Òun náà bá jọ̀wọ́ ara rẹ̀ fún olórí yẹn. Ìgbà tó jọ̀wọ́ ara rẹ̀ fún tán ó wá ní pé kí ni àṣírí agbára tí ẹ máa ń lò tẹ́ fi wá máa ń mú àwọn. Wọ́n bá yí pé báyìí ni ó wá sọ àṣírí agbára fún Mọ́remí. Mọ́remí wá sáré wá sífẹ̀ ó wá sọ pé báyìí ni. Nígbà tí wọ́n ń bọ̀ láti wá jalè sí, wọ́n máa ti nọ́mbà wọn ní ara bí apá wọn ti jábọ́ nìyẹn, bí Ifẹ̀ ti ṣẹ́gun nìyẹn. Wọ́n á ní pé sẹ́yìn pé ọmọ rẹ̀ kan ṣoṣo tó bí Olórogbo sẹ́yìn pé ó wájà. Àwọn ní pé ká má gbàgbé arábìnrin yìí pé arábìnrin yìí ló ṣe oore fúnfẹ̀. Àdìgbà yẹn náà ti máa ń ṣe ọdún Mọ́remí. Yàrá tí wọ́n sọdún Mọ́remí ó la máa ṣe ní on 25.
What up, African World?
All right, so we're going to go a little bit north, and we are going to learn about the Dogon. And Dogon have always been interesting to me because, like, they have these, first of all, they have, like, these cliff residences, these cliff dwellings, and then they have a very, very, very advanced knowledge of astrology. Where does it come from? Let's find out.
It's Home Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And welcome back to my series, A Closer Look. Today, we're going to take a closer look at the Dogon people of Mali. And as always, if you want to support the Home Team, you can do so on patreon.com. I have some new rewards for you guys, so be sure to check that out. Also, go to afrographics.com, a website where you can find unique illustrative infographics summarizing African history. All links to Patreon, Afrographics, and Home Team merchandise are in the description box below. According to oral tradition, the Dogon were originally members of the Kita family, a Mande-speaking group from the Niger River who fled their homes sometime between the 10th and the 13th centuries because they refused to convert to Islam. The oral tradition may show that the Dogon absorbed Mande-speaking refugees from the centralized Islamic kingdoms of the Niger Basin. However, the Voltaic or Gur language of the Dogon suggests a more ancient presence in their present-day homeland in south-central Mali. They inhabit the rugged and isolated Bandigara escarpment and surrounding regions southwest of the Niger Bend. The cliffs at the edge of the escarpment protected the Dogon from outside invaders. Dogon settlements concentrate around isolated pockets of arable land, where they farm millet as a subsistence crop. Traditionally, the Dogon have shared this territory with the Fulani, who exchanged their dairy products for Dogon grain and produce. Their rugged and isolated territory left them relatively unaffected by French colonialism and missionary work. By maintaining their pre-colonial cultural traditions and customs, the Dogon have attracted the attention of numerous ethnographers, including the French anthropologist Marcel Grial and the French ethnographic filmmaker Jean Roche. In recent years, however, the Dogon have increased their participation in the cash economy. Some villages have specialized in traditional crafts and performances in order to attract commercial tourism. Some Dogon have even left their homeland in search of wage labor, particularly in Bamako, Mali, and the mines of Côte d'Ivoire. Unfortunately, the Dogon have also recently faced animosity from their Fulani neighbors, with whom they compete for scarce mineral resources and mining jobs. A Hogan, or headman, traditionally the oldest man in the area, provides spiritual leadership. He performs rituals and safeguards the religious mask for which the Dogon are famous. The Dogon fall into at least 4 smaller groups: the Dayan, Aru, Onan, and Dumno. Unlike their Muslim neighbors, most Dogon still practice a traditional religion with a complex mythology. This has received considerable anthropological attention. Dogon cosmology considers every being a combination of complementary opposites. Elaborate rituals are necessary to maintain this balance. Ancestor worship is another important facet of Dogon religion. Members of the Society of Mask perform rituals to guarantee that a person's life force will flee from his or her corpse to a future relative of the same lineage. One of the most famous Dogon rituals is the Sigi, a series of rituals performed once every 60 years, recorded by filmmaker Jean Roche. Islamic missionaries, however, have had some success among the Dogon, and approximately 35% of the Dogon population are now Muslim. Much of Dogon art consists of ritual masks made with carved wood and other materials. Dogon architecture conveys symbolic relationships in Dogon society and is considered one of the most distinctive styles in West Africa. When the Dogon arrived at the Bandiagara escarpment, they found architecture and other remains of earlier civilizations, among these the Tolo and the Telem. Dogon villages are constructed to resemble a human body. At the head of the village is a blacksmith's shop and a toguna, a community men's house. The toguna is an open-walled structure with roof supports carved in human shapes, often the female form. Typically, the toguna has 8 such supports, with the number representing the first 8 Dogon ancestors who sat in a ruling council. Today, these ancestors impart wisdom and spiritual knowledge to Dogon elders when they meet in the togona to discuss village affairs. In the Dogon religion, Amma is the supreme creator god. The efforts of Amma initiated the formation of the universe, the creation of matter, and the process of biological reproduction. The notion of a creator god named Amma or Amen is one that is not unique to the Dogon people, but can also be found in the religious tradition of other West African and North African groups. Like other important Dogon cosmological keywords, the word Amma carries with it more than one level of meaning in the Dogon language. From one perspective, it can refer to the hidden god of the Dogon, and yet from another perspective, it can mean to grasp, to hold firm, or to establish. Among the Dogon, Amma is thought of as the god who holds the world firmly between his or her 2 hands, and to speak the name Amma is to entreat him or her to continue to hold it. Although commonly referred to as male, Amma is considered to symbolize both male and female principles, and as a result is more properly characterized as genderless or as being of dual gender. This dual aspect of Amma's character is consistent with the broader cosmological principles of duality and the pairing of opposites that are expressed symbolically in all facets of Dogon religion and culture. It's also consistent with the male and female aspects of biological reproduction that Amma symbolizes. The Dogon religion is characterized as an esoteric tradition, one that involves both public and private aspects. Although Amma could be said to embody great creative potential, he or she is in fact considered by the knowledgeable Dogon priests to be small, so small as to be effectively hidden from view. Although this detail of Amma's character is generally not spoken of, in public among the Dogon. This perceived smallness of Amma is consonant with the instrumental role that he or she is said to play in the mythological processes of the formation of matter and of biological reproduction. Perhaps the first important creation of the Dogon god Amma was an unformed universe, a body that is said to have held all the potential seeds or signs of future existence. The Dogon referred to this body as Amma's egg. Now, it's actually been noted by respected researchers of Dogon myth, such as historian Nicholas Grimmel in his book A History of Ancient Egypt, that there are likely symbolic parallels between key Dogon mythological characters and those of ancient Egypt. For instance, it can be argued that Amma is a likely counterpart to the Egyptian hidden god Amen, much as attributes of the jackal of the Dogon myths present clear parallels to the jackal god of the Egyptian underworld. Likewise,
So we've already got them, basically the existence of the Dogon and their way of looking at the world, the religious framework, kind of pushed a lie to the myth that Egyptians were, first of all, not black. That's a lie. And then, second of all, that it has had no bearing on later cultures. So it's important to combat Eurocentrism, and not just Eurocentrism, but outright racism and bullshit history that the Enlightenment and later imperialist era so-called scholars tried to put out about our people.
comparisons can be made between the Egyptian god Sab or Anpu, who acts as judge between good and evil, and the pale fox of Dogon tradition, who is charged with a similar role of judging between truth and error. The religious beliefs of the Dogon were first documented in studies conducted during the 30s, 40s, and 50s by French anthropologists Marcel Garel and Germain Deterlaine. A very interesting aspect of Grael's observation of Dogon cosmology lies with the suggestion that the Dogon know subtle details of the star system of Sirius beyond what might be reasonably observed with the naked eye. These details include an understanding that Sirius is a binary star system composed of a large, bright, sun-like star, Sirius A, and a much smaller, darker, dense, and heavy dwarf star, Sirius B. Goral also reported that the Dogon are aware of the 50-year period of orbit of Sirius B and Sirius A, a value that the Dogon assign as the interval between ritual observances of an important festival called Sigi, as mentioned before. These attributes of the Sirius star system were confirmed by the modern scientific community in 1915, almost 40 years before they were reported by Goral in connection with the Dogon. Based on that fact, Carl Sagan proposed that the Dogon most likely learned these astronomical facts from some modern visitor and later chose to incorporate them into the body of myth they reported to Grael. Germain Deterlaine disagreed with Sagan's interpretation and defended the indigenous nature of the Dogon's Sirius information by producing a 400-year-old artifact illustrated by the Dogon people. There are other speculative aspects of Dogon cosmology that give the impression of a deeper relationship between Dogon myth and actual science. Goral says that the Dogon myths describe how the Dogon god, Amma, created the universe in matter. The Dogon conceive of the unformed universe as a kind of primordial ball that contained all of the potential seeds or signs of the future universe. This ball is referred to as Amma's egg, as mentioned before, and Dogon artistic renderings of it take the same cone-like shape as the event horizon of a black hole in science. Stephen Hawking describes a black hole as an astronomical body that most closely resembles what the unformed universe may have looked like. Likewise, Dogon descriptions of the formation of the universe from Amma's egg are distinctly reminiscent of the Big Bang theory in science. According to Dogon myth, some undefined impulse caused this ball to open, releasing a whirlwind that spun and scattered its contents all over the universe, ultimately forming all the galaxies of stars and planets. Dogon descriptions of the mythological structure of matter are similarly reminiscent of science. They begin with a primary unit of matter called the Po, which the Dogon define in terms similar to an atom. The Dogon priests say that all matter is created by the continuous addition of like elements beginning with the Po. Likewise, the Po is defined as comprising smaller subcomponents like seneseeds, whose mythological descriptions, supposedly according to some, sound much like the protons, neutrons, and electrons of modern science. According to Dogon belief, these seeds combine at the center of the Po and then surrounded by a crossing in all directions.
So note that they came to all of these scientific revelations and discoveries independent of European influence. It's kind of like when Kwame Ture said that if Marx hadn't existed, somebody in Timbuktu or another advanced society that had class struggle would have come to the exact same conclusions that Marx had.
To form a nest. A Dogon cosmological drawing of this nest takes a shape that is very similar to one of the typical electron orbital paths inscribed by an electron as it circles the nucleus of an atom. Like modern quantum theory, the Dogon myths tell of the existence of more than 200 primordial particles described as seeds or signs that are said to exist as paired opposites. Like modern string theory or torsion theory, these particles are said to be the product of the vibrations of primordial threads. According to Dogon myth, each thread passes through a series of 7 vibrations inside a tiny egg. These vibrations are characterized as 7 rays of a star of increasing length. The Dogon myths say that this last ray grows long enough to pierce the egg, an event that constitutes the end of the original egg and the initiation of a new egg. Together, these eggs in series are said to form membranes, which the Dogon compare to the thin covering that surrounds the brain. The Dogon alternately characterize these 7 rays by the spiral that can be drawn to inscribe their endpoints. This spiral can be said to be the tiny vortex that is proposed to exist in modern torsion theory. The Dogon myths also define a second thread of biological symbolism describing the formation of life from a fertilized egg, which can be seen to run parallel to actual biological science. The myths describe the hardening of an unfertilized egg that occurs at the moment of fertilization by a sperm and include descriptions of structures that resemble chromosomes and spindles and that seem to accurately describe key events that pertain to the division of a cell through the process of meiosis and mitosis. All in all, the Dogon seem to have orally recorded significant amounts of ancient African knowledge. Their culture not only preserves their own identity, but it also preserves invaluable scientific knowledge. The Dogon are no doubt one of the intellectual treasures of Africa. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and want to help out in its continued production.
So yeah, pretty dope. Same region. Let's go to Mali. So Mali is probably the most famous West African polity because you had Mansa Musa there, the guy that generated a substantial amount of inflation when he went on the Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca. So that's how Europe came to find out about him. But a lot of these empires were located in areas that had a substantial measure of gold and salt. So they were at the end of several trade routes that took gold and salt and other necessities like slaves to Europe and the Arab world. So probably the most famous. And let's see. What was it?
Hi. Who was Sundiata Keita? What was his role in the founding of the ancient empire of Mali? Welcome to the Sankofa Pan-African series. Please subscribe if you've not yet done so, and click on your notification button so we can let you know when new episodes are showing. Thank you. Now, Mali was established by the Mandinka, also known as Mandingo, a more popular name for the ethnic group, I believe, since Kunta Kinte described himself as one in the major drama series Roots, written by Alex Haley, about his family. Now, we should not be surprised by Alex Haley's success as a storyteller, since he traced his ancestry to his ethnic group, which is famous for producing some of the most enduring epics through jellies, known in the French language as griots, and the practice of the jelia. The story of the evolution of the Empire of Mali, which overtook Ghana, is very interesting and is often conflated with the stories of its two most famous rulers, Sundiata Keita and Mansa Musa Keita, whose stories have been left as epics woven together and preserved through oral and recently written traditions. According to his own epic, Sundiata Keita's father was a handsome ruler of the Mandinka who married an equally beautiful wife who bore him a son, Dankaran Tumani Keita. However, a soothsayer who visited this king's court predicted that if he married an ugly woman, she would bear him a son who would one day become a very mighty king. Subsequently, he was presented with a hunchbacked woman by some hunters. Although this woman who was presented was not nearly as beautiful as the bride he already had, he married her in the hope of fulfilling the prophecy. Unfortunately, when she gave birth to a son, Sundiata, he was unable to walk. Still, hopeful that the prediction would be somehow fulfilled, the king tried to raise his crippled son without prejudice. Unfortunately, after the king died, his first son, Dankaran Tumani Keita, became king, but he was not accommodating of his disabled half-brother. As such, Sundiata, his mother...
I'd like to see a Netflix series about this too. Like, there is so much. Like, people think that Africans, all we had were like decentralized bands of hunter gatherers. Like, no, we had advanced, well developed polities that had, in many cases, existed long before Europe had states. So, like, this just shows the importance of what we're shown on television and what people choose to talk about. Like, every political period piece, you got the Medicis, you've got the Borgias, you've got The Last Kingdom, which I just finished up. Really good show. But like, black people need to see ourselves portrayed in a positive light. And I'm not saying that political backstabbing is a positive light, but it's a lot better than just being perpetually portrayed as dope boys and victims of crimes or committers of crimes. You know what I'm saying?
Mother and his two sisters were either banished or chose to leave the kingdom, depending on who was telling the story. So there are two versions. Some Oral version said that they were banished. Others said that they chose to leave the kingdom for their safety. Anyway, they moved to a neighboring kingdom where Sundiata, who could only walk with the use of a walking stick made out of a baobab branch, miraculously gained use of his legs. He then trained with the best warrior of that kingdom till he became such a formidable fighter. His prowess made him so good, so indispensable as a warrior, that his host kingdom chose to make him the heir to their throne. However, in fulfillment of his destiny, the burgeoning Mali, which had started, Mali had started growing, but into a kingdom, sent for him after his half-brother, Donarang Tumani Keita, took flight when the Mandinka were attacked and overcome by a marauding group which had already captured some kingdoms from the Ghana Empire. Some sources identify this group as the Almoravids, but others just identify them as a group of people who were capturing people in order to convert them to Islam. Sundiata then strategically entered into an alliance with other small kingdoms, who then enthroned him as the first Mansa of the collective kingdoms. Now, of course, Mansa means emperor, ruler, a king, and all of that. He succeeded in organizing this motley lot into a cohesive unit under the first bara, or assembly of nobles and minor kings of the emerging empire. So some form of democracy, I think we can started developing, because he did not rule as an absolute king. He formed this assembly of nobles who were made up of kings of other smaller empires. And then he then presented them with a set of rules and regulations for administering the domain at his coronation. This move was to guarantee peace and prosperity in the new state, or the emerging empire. Initially, the capital of this new empire of Mali was Kangaba. I hope I'm pronouncing that, Kangaba, which was located on the banks of the Niger River. Sundiata's ascension as a Mansa was in 1230, and as he went on to expand the handful of kingdoms into a formidable empire, he moved the capital to Niani. After overtaking Ghana, he quickly took control of the gold trade, which Ghana had been famous for, and started improving agriculture by turning many of the soldiers in his army into farmers. They cultivated fertile land, which therefore produced plentiful harvests of grains, peanuts, and other food crops, as well as cotton. At his death in 1255, Sundiata was succeeded by his son, who was also followed by a number of other less remarkable emperors until 1307, when another great ruler, Musa Keita, ascended the throne. As you will see if you watch our episode on Mansa Musa, this extraordinary ruler of Mali is believed by modern economists to have been the wealthiest person who ever lived, even when compared to today's standards. So, according to some accounts, Musa Keita became Mansa when he ascended to the throne after his uncle, Abubakar Keita, II. He was initially appointed to deputize for Abubakar Keita during his absence. Abubakar Keita did this, that is, appointed him when he set off on an expedition to find the limits of the Atlantic Ocean, but never returned. So
Yeah, that's a pretty famous account. Like the guy before Mansa, I believe his name was Suleiman or something, um, built a bunch of boats and tried to discover what was the limit of the Atlantic Ocean. And this story is why a lot of conspiracy theorists, or hoteps, you could call them, think that Africans in the were basically indigenous to the Americas because of memories of this story. Like we very possibly might have visited here, but the Americas belong to the indigenous people and the indigenous people alone. But yeah, like they see the Olmec heads. Like Africans are not the only people who have broad noses and full lips. But we're talking about real history here, not Hotep or Eurocentric bullshit. And that's another reason why I chose to make this video. Like, a lot of our people are so caught up on trying to be shit that we're not. Like, oh, the original Chinese were black, or the original Japanese were black, or the Greeks were black, or everybody black. While we were the first human beings, obviously the first human beings came out of Africa. Every anthropologist agrees. But like that's a disservice. That's disrespectful to the Chinese people, the Japanese people, people who have their own cultural heritage. And we lose our own history. Like, our history is that of West and Central Africa, or Africa as a whole. So when you focus on other areas of the world and try to place us in places where we were not, you're engaging in a sort of ahistorical bullshit. I understand why it happens. I understand why it happens. Our history was stolen, and we try to align ourselves with people who we see as being strong. But we are also strong. We have always been strong. So focus on our historical strength.
Naturally, it fell. The throne fell on Musa, who became enthroned after they waited for his uncle, and he didn't come back. Now, historians like Ivan van Sertima
Is that Bill Clinton?
believe that some of the sailors that Abubakar sent found their way to the Americas long before Christopher Columbus. Please, if you have not yet read the book, They Came Before Columbus by Ivan van Sertima, do so. And I want to thank our viewers out there. Some of them have actually posted in the comment section and have recommended this book. So please make the time to look for the book, They Came Before Columbus by Ivan van Sertima. Now, Mansa Musa was a man
I'm going to get that book, like, just out of curiosity.
of many interests and talents. And over a reign of about 25 years, he consolidated the wealth of the empire and left his mark in many areas, such as education. He was a patron of the arts and sciences. Although he adhered to the Muslim faith and tried to get as many of his citizens as he could to follow in his footsteps, he was pragmatic and open-minded enough to allow them their freedom of religion. Now, one of the most famous accounts of his reign illustrates the wealth of Mali as an empire and Mansa Musa's personal wealth. There are several accounts of his pilgrimage to Mecca. He made that pilgrimage in 1324. And apart from his wife, Inari Kunati, some accounts assert that he had over 60,000 men and women accompany him on this spectacular journey through the desert. John G. Jackson reports that in order to finance this trip, several camels were laden with 300 pounds of gold each. He was accompanied by a very efficient commissary department and several cooks. Jackson further illustrates this emperor's wealth by the impact that his presence made in Cairo, which was in Egypt, where he stopped on his way to and back from Mecca. So apart from the elaborate reception accorded him by the Sultan of Egypt, the amount of...
Yeah. Like he was basically going around handing out gold to everybody he saw. And when you pump that much gold into an economy, gold is devalued. So, yeah, they were inflated for years after Mansa Musa went through. So, yeah.
gold
You know, black people, we always got to floss.
circulated by the emperor and his entourage during his visit was so vast that it brought about a slump in the gold market in Egypt. It was reported by an official of the Egyptian government that it took them 12 years for the gold market to be revived after Mansa Musa's visit. This elaborate pilgrimage was so widely reported that several European cartographers started publishing maps showing the location of Mali because of the level of interest by the European public in locating this wealthy empire. They were desperate to find the source of the wealth. There is a reproduction of a map made for King Charles XIV of France with a drawing of Mansa Musa on it. He's seen wearing regal robes and an elaborate crown. He is drawn holding a scepter in one hand and a large gold nugget in the other. Copies of the map with the drawing are available online.
Look at this dude coming towards him with a fucking whip. Foreshadowing, maybe? I think that's meant to be either an Arab or a Berber. But it looks like a white dude with a turban on coming to flog this dude.
And if you Google images of Mansa Musa. So I have written a children's illustrated book about this charismatic ruler of Mali, which is available for sale through Amazon in Grams Park, as well as Okada Books for viewers in Africa who might be interested in purchasing it for their children. It is the first of a series of children's illustrated books that we're working on to make our history accessible to our children from a very early age. Thank you very much for watching. We'll continue with the history of Mali.
I love her voice. Like, she just has a very calm, grandmotherly, warm voice. I want to watch more of her. The research for this that I did, which was basically just glomming together a bunch of YouTube videos to try to prove my point that Africa is pretty dope. Its history is pretty dope. And slavery did not really give us anything because we already had this shit. But, like, it just introduced me to a variety of YouTube channels that I'm definitely going to be watching more of. So, iron, essential for the development of a civilization, no? One major settler lie is that we never invented the wheel. We never had draft animals. We never had iron tools. They think that they brought us all of this shit, okay? If anything, we had it, like, long before that. Look at these years. 1000 BC to 500 CE. Prior video already explained how we skipped the Bronze Age. This is how advanced we were. We went straight from the Stone Age into iron, kind of on accident, because we were over there making pottery, and we found some shit that could be used to make iron out of. We made tools and weapons out of it. So, how did the Iron Age develop in Africa?
Iron metallurgy in Africa has been, and still remains today, a very controversial topic. While it is known with certainty that mining, smelting, and forging of iron on the African continent is an ancient practice, the specific origins, dates, and in some cases, methods of production remain a topic of serious scholarly debate, with some archaeologists claiming that iron was diffused into Africa from Eurasia, primarily through trade with Carthage and the Nile Valley, while others lean more towards an indigenous sub-Saharan African innovation, since there are sites deep within sub-Saharan
The latter is correct.
Africa with dates just as ancient as those of
That's a racist analysis. They're saying that, the Egyptians and the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Phoenicians had to teach us how to make iron. It's bullshit. It's not that hard.
Carthage and the Nile. This debate persists to present day, and more archaeology and research is needed in order to draw any firm conclusions. The oldest undisputed dates for ironworking on the African continent come from Egypt, while some much older sites can be found deep within Central Africa and West Africa, and date back to 2000 BCE and 1500 BCE respectively. However, the methods used to date these sites sparked controversy among archaeologists, and thus the results remain inconclusive. This is due mostly in part to the overwhelming lack of archaeological work done in Africa in comparison to the rest of the world. Regardless of its origins or the controversial dates in sub-Saharan Africa, it is very well established that the Iron Age in this region was for the most part contemporary with the rest of the Old World, and that it diffused to the remainder of the continent primarily via several intracontinental epicenters through trade, migrations, and in some cases, warfare. It is also very clear that the methods used to mine, smelt, and forge iron were ancient, rich, diverse, and unique to the African continent, with virtually no evidence of outside influence. In this video, we will animate the spread of iron metallurgy throughout Africa, utilizing undisputed dates only.
So this already is disproving the racist narrative that ironworking was introduced to Africa from the outside. Like, you've got Urewe down here and this over here. Like, I mean, I guess trade routes are a possibility, but like, okay, you've got pretty impenetrable jungle down here. Like, the Romans didn't make it down here for a reason. The Greeks didn't make it down to this area for a reason, because you've got this huge equatorial jungle over here that makes it kind of hard. Now, this was a trade route, as was this, but like down here, no. So it's basically a given that all of these groups developed ironworking on their own. The Workers' Party 420 said that the European colonizers only came to the heart of Africa in the late 18th century. And like, the narrative about slavery is that you had Europeans that were fucking around like in the middle here. Like, no, Europeans hung out around the coast, because like Europeans were not used to this climate. They were not traveling all the way over here to catch slaves because they would die. Like, malaria was a thing. You got dengue fever. You've got all sorts of diseases that they had uh, no real way to combat until quinine. Quinine was invented, an anti-malarial drug, but so they were real heavily dependent on nations that lived around here. Like you had Dahomey here, which was a um, major slaving nation, but they were relying on the people that lived around the coasts to bring them people from in here or in here. So that's what the whole thing about, oh, Africans sold other Africans into slavery. It's like, no, there would have been like no market if Europeans weren't there. So ultimately the blame is still on Europeans. I'm not a fan of assigning blame throughout history. I'm a fan of um making sure that this stuff doesn't repeat itself and changing the harmful effects that slavery has had on my people. But if we're going to be handing out blame, the blame's still on Europeans, because the Europeans were the ones who had the plantations in Brazil, Saint Domingue, soon to be renamed Haiti, Cuba, the United States, and all these other places. If the European demand wasn't there, I mean, you would have still had the Arab market, which didn't really close until like the early 1900s. But like the slave trade would not have happened if the Europeans hadn't demanded it. So we were the first people to invent steel as well. Well, develop steel. Hiya blacksmiths of what is now Tanzania invent the earliest known open hearth furnace, capable of producing high quality steel, a technology unmatched elsewhere until the 19th century. So
With the arrival of Malagasy settlers, iron finally reached Madagascar in roughly 500 CE, marking the end of the Iron Age in Africa. The whole of the continent had fully replaced stone and bronze with iron technology. At this time, even hunter-gatherers such as the San peoples of southern Africa and the Pygmy peoples of Central Africa primarily relied on iron technology.
Also, names like pygmies and Bantu, like those are European insults, or insults used by Europeans. The proper name for the Bantu, if I recall correctly, is the Nguni people, and the proper name for the so-called pygmies is Mbuti.
Which they obtained through trade with neighboring peoples.
They do that a lot with indigenous tribes. Like a lot of the names that we Anglos, we English speakers use for indigenous tribes are like insults. Like every nation of indigenous people has its own name for itself. So we should endeavor to use these names and not inadvertently use insults that were developed either by Europeans or by indigenous people that they were enemies with.
Several island chains along the African coast, such as the Comoros and Cape Verde Islands, remained uninhabited until they were settled by European explorers, while the Canary Islands were populated by an isolated peoples whom were still utilizing stone technology during the time that the Spanish arrived in the mid-15th century. This video was created in collaboration with Stefan Milo and Ali Bai, so be sure to check out their videos. Stefan hosts a more thorough break.
So, what can we glean from this about West Africa before slavery, or West Africa before European colonization? Like, was this a howling wilderness like the Americans say that our country was, which is another lie? Absolutely not. You had parts of Yoruba land that were more industrialized, that were more urbanized than many parts of Europe. There's an argument made that we had the first Iron Age. You had steel production, granted in East Africa, but it was undoubtedly in West Africa as well. So this just shows that, like, these people on Twitter that are stupidly saying that slavery improved the well-being of black people or somehow elevated us out of the darkness is nonsense, because it wasn't us who was in the darkness. Africa is a sunny, beautiful continent. We were never in darkness. It was Europe who was in darkness. So after this, I am going to talk about the impact of slavery on the Africans that unfortunately ended up here, some of which were my ancestors. So this is a really personal thing for me, because I'm a pan-Africanist, which means that I believe that Africa and the diaspora should unite, because that is the best way to stop European Chinese imperialism from fucking us over. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I have for tonight. Do your research on Africa. Step into the light. I'm B.